get started. So, hello everyone. Thank you for joining our first Building Smart USA webinar of the year. Today, we will be kicking off with a panel of amazing women joining us from both coasts. We have Alexa Mitchell from HDR, Cindy Baldwin from VDCO Tech, Lynn Hiel from Caltrans, and Karen Kensek from USC School of Architecture, who will be facilitating a panel discussion and Q&A afterwards. So if you have any questions, please enter them into the chat window. And without further delay, Cindy.
Perfect. I'm going to share my screen with you all. So as soon as that gets brought up, we will get things going. You should be seeing the full screen of my presentation at this point. So with that being said, please stick around. You're stuck starting with me, but I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my little BIM, openBIM journey. But it's kind of good. And then you get best and best following me with Lynn and Alexa from Caltrans and HDR. So to kind of get started, who I am, my name is Cindy Baldwin. I am a certified general contractor. Been in the industry for over 32 years. I'm president of a company called VDCO Tech. We are muddy boot BIMers, as I like to say. We work across the entire supply chain from architecture, engineering, construction, and owners. And I do serve with a lot of committees to kind of see what the pulse is happening out there in our industry. But really where I got started in the AEC industry was at 13 years old. So my career path is I started with my dad. He was an engineer and a licensed general contractor. And I used to go out in the field and measure rebar, how many inches away from the corners, from the top, from the bottom. And believe it or not, I counted curse words because he always wanted to know the less curse words, the better the job site should be running. I went to school at University of Miami. I have a broadcast journalism degree, believe it or not. I went to work for CBS News. Quickly realized that was not where my heart really was. Got right back in my 20s and 30s into the built environment. I worked with CocoWalk, with a developer. We were the #1 entertainment shopping center in the country at the time. Swordlow Development Company, did a lot of major large land planning project and shopping malls, and then actually went to work for Lindt Chocolate. Moved to New Hampshire in the cold. Quickly realized that it was fun and I learned a lot opening stores from Maine to Florida, but I wanted to get back to sunny South Florida. So in my 30s and 40s, I went and worked for a land planning landscape architecture company and was a minority partner and shareholder in an architectural firm. And that's really where BIM, I was bit by the BIM bug. And I opened VDCO Tech and the rest is kind of history. But I think why I really embrace BIM is I learned in my 30s that I do not have visual memory. So what that means is if you close your eyes right now and I ask you to picture that apple, do you picture the red apple? If you do, you have visual memory. If you don't, you're like me and you only see the black. And I think this was really telling for me because my dad could always say, man, you know, these architects, they draw pretty pictures, but they don't build anything. And there was curse words and all this stuff from construction. And he could say he could see from the drawings in his mind. He could see it in his mind and build it. And I never could. And then I realized, well, I don't have visual memory, so that might be part of my problem. But I also thought there was probably more people out there like me that couldn't. So what I started to do was look at where the current processes were, you know, from traditional process into what we were doing in 2D CAD and how that process worked, our ability to reuse that information, you know, kind of stops after design and construction. And then we started the owner operator because I had worked on both sides of the fence. I understood where things needed to go at the end of the job to kind of manage that. So the future that I wanted to see and that everybody was promising that BIM would have was this design, construction, operation phases becomes one. You know, we have this wonderful BIM utopia with these models, they could do everything, right? Everybody was using the models, all our different trade partners and engineers, architects, contractors. The owner wanted the model as now digital twins. We were hearing this. And we also heard that the ability to repurpose this information was greatly expanded. And as that information ultimately expanded, you could actually push that information into your building information management systems, into your facility management systems. And it was just kind of this big, easy process. And then reality kind of set in for me. And I said, I don't know how to do that. So let me start looking at the resources that I typically would go to, the AIA, the AGC, from an owner's perspective, maybe COA, CURT, you know, there was BIM Forum, Construction Progress Coalition, you know, all wonderful groups, all looking to try to solve this problem, but they had their own unique spin on it. So I found this quote, and I think this really kind of puts in perspective where I was at the time, because Trimble Construction said, we do not need more sets of standards from individual countries. I would add organizations to that. We need a unified language that promotes the communication between the technology, so it doesn't really matter what's used. And that really rings true to me. And it was something that my clients were asking for because they had heard all this great stuff about BIM, but they really didn't know how to implement it. And being a small practitioner, you had these big companies blazing the way, HDR and all these other great firms that were doing it. I didn't want to blaze the way. I just wanted to implement it, and I wanted to do it well, and I wanted to offer value to my clients. So I started to look at what open standards were and really what was the building block and the foundation of innovation. And if you look at just, PDF, Adobe created it, but in 2008, it became open. And then obviously the internet's, I think, one of the greatest examples, right, of where open standards and you define the protocols and the programming and all the language, stuff that, by the way, I have no idea how to do. But once it was done, then I could work and utilize it. So that led me to buildingSMART. I wanted to know who in our industry was actually trying to do that. What was that umbrella organization? And when I looked and found buildingSMART, they were looking to enable the full benefit of BIM in digital workways across the entire industry. It was open, it was a nonprofit, it had international reach. And I thought, man, this is what a wonderful organization. Even though sometimes I thought the language they were speaking was way above my head. I'm not the technical programmer, academic, and I was a little fearful at first when going in. But I knew it was the place to be because I really don't like recreating the wheel. So there was already all these other countries and groups and work groups, and they called them rooms that were out there through buildingSMART that were trying to integrate and improve collaboration and ultimately do this in an open format that benefited us all. And I just thought it was the greatest thing. And then I thought, okay, how can I apply this? What is the business opportunity for me personally, my company, for the people who work with me? And what is the business opportunity for my clients? Like where can we ultimately take this? In doing that, I had to step back. I needed to really understand where technology was in the original process that it was today and where it was going, because change management is the number one thing that I would have to focus on to make sure that the BIM and VDC were being implemented in the present day, but also then strategically trying to plan for it in the future. And if you look at where we were in the 60s with, these tiny processors, and this is when CAD was, really started, and memory on microchips, to then moving into the 90s and early 2000, where you have globalization, you have the cloud, you have these networks, you have speed, you have internet, things just really were imploding. And then back in 2017, I found out that over $10 billion was being invested just in construction technology for that year. And I thought, okay, I'm not the only one looking at the business value on this. I need to really get my head around it, understanding where we're going with the sensors and the data, because at this point, I have a smart home, I have a smart car, I had all of this I have a smart watch, I have a smart phone, but I didn't have smart VDC processes. And that was of concern to me because I knew my clients were going to start to ask for that. And then I looked at where the trends were in the industry. So if you look at BIM and then performance-based design, there was VDC, lean, IPD, reality capture. I could add AI into this now today. What does that actually mean? And I started to break these kind of revolutionizing trends that were happening. And I thought, okay, really what they're trying to do is just rethink the design and engineering process. I truly am blind. I try to simplify things into like the common process and language. And then I thought, okay, from VDC, they're looking to improve on-site execution. When you're looking at lean and IPD, it's how we're improving our procurement and our supply chain management, ultimately to use technology and look at automation to improve our efficiency and so forth. So what is the value? What is the value environment? And what is that collaborative system exchanges? And again, it brings me back to buildingSMART. And it was really one of my first lessons because I had to realize that that was the ideal. And I had to mix that ideal with the reality of today. And it was a lot of hard work. But once I did that, it is true, it was more than I could ever hope for. I was able to position my company to bridge that gap really between the process of present and the technology that was there, and then work with my clients in buildingSMART to kind of move them towards that future that they were looking for. Broward County, Kansas City International Airport, Regeneron Pharmaceutical, Florida International University. All of these players were looking really to adopt and improve procedures to create that integrated approach for design and construction. Then we needed to make it real world today by putting BIM requirements that were fair, that were practical, that could be procured, that could be insured, and meet that current tech standard, as well as the current standard of process and implementation based on contracting. And then how could they ultimately support the AEC industry moving forward? Because open and integrated was the future of what they wanted to do. I needed to make my client streams a reality. And in doing so, I needed to relook at the tools that were there, how they were using those tools and what procedures needed to be put in place. And when ultimately, per a strategic plan, they could implement and continue to move forward in this open BIM environment. It meant that we had to look to reskill our workforce. We needed to reshape team dynamics. And then ultimately, we needed to look at the contractual frameworks that we were working with. So, charts like this, you've seen them before, but it's, looking at the basic BIM uses we could do today with technology. We define the uses by geometry, by data, by file format, including IFC, and then including native file. And then what the documentation was that was required, and then who ultimately was delivering it, how they were delivering it. If we're looking at data, how COBie interfaced, what the design team was responsible for, what the contractor was responsible for, where they had joint uses that they actually had to work together, and then ultimately how we contract for that deliverable. And I needed to break it down even further to say what's there, BIM authoring tools today, the spreadsheets we use to collect data, the FM software that it ultimately wants to go through, and what role would COBie play? Which one was good for geometric data, capturing that? Which one was good for maybe capturing some middle data or field data? So we have to be able to kind of map these processes as they exist today, so we can work with our clients and moving them forward into the future. As we move forward with COBie, we wanted to make sure, and this is a very simplified workflow, but the facility information specification in the contract, what was entered in the models, what's exported by COBie, what's ultimately imported into our facility management systems. And as simple as this chart looks, we need to have the plan behind it. In the COBie implementation plans, the purpose, the assigning the roles and the responsibilities, making sure that what's in your native file is in your IFC file, which is in your COBie export. How are we to check that? How are we to maintain that? And should we actually maintain that? Are all questions that we needed to address and that we needed to continue to move forward. Because ultimately, Broward County, Regeneron, FIU, Kansas City, they have IFC requirements, they have COBie requirements because they're looking at that interoperability and they're ultimately wanting better, smarter handovers as they move forward. And it's not, when I say we have to change from software to data centric, we don't forget software. We need software. We need to understand what's happening with Autodesk and ArchiCAD and Bentley and all of the systems that are out there. Because sometimes our clients like Broward County on projects, we could have over 90 different software plugins, tools, drones, you name it. We're out there on site with all of these new captures, but how ultimately are they working together in a common data environment? And it's really exciting to see that buildingSMART is looking to see how IFC files can be used in that transactional environment, in the common data environment as we move forward. So with all of that being said, I believe that we have to focus on the present. We have to look at the small businesses. We have to understand what they're doing. But yet, if we're hoping for a better future and a better connected future, we actually have to invest in it today. And if we don't, it's like a farmer who plants the crop and wants to harvest the crop, but he hasn't planted the seed. And to me, buildingSMART was that organization, and open BIM standards in the IFC was the route to get me to go forward and to help my clients have that connected environment. I don't create the standards. I'm not going to pretend and tell you today that I am the IFC COBie expert. I know the people that are, and I know the organization, and I support the organization that's moving those standards forward. I believe that my role in this industry is to report back on the pain points. It's to say, here's what people are using today. Here's their maturity level today in the open market. Here's the barriers that are currently hindering them, whether they be people, change management barriers, process barriers, technology barriers. And then I like to say that I work to kind of bridge that gap between that idealism and that future vision that we know we're all going to with connectivity and interoperability, and then where that practical meets the road. I'm really, really proud to chair the buildingSMART USA Airport Group. As the chair of that, my job was really to go out and find the big dogs, to find the big guns out there that were experts as it related today with implementation, working in airports with data. Scott Yates with Wolpert, WSP participates heavily. We have Esri involved as we have these different work rooms. And then it's to kind of come together and see what the initiatives that are happening out there. So I welcome you to get involved. It's, to me, this is the way. For any Star Wars fans that are out there, buildingSMART, open standards, it is the way. And whatever organization you're working with, I think that we just really need to focus on how we get there today. And buildingSMART is planning for our future. And there's people like me out there that are actually trying to implement in the field and in the ground. So with that being said, you're going to get much better presentations from this point out. I just kind of was laying the groundwork. But Lynn, I'm going to turn it over to you with Caltrans, and she's going to explain to you some of the pilot projects and how they're working on that today. So with that being said, Lynn, if you want to take the screen, it's yours.
All right, hopefully you can see my screen, Cindy.
We can.
Okay,
it's
wonderful.
good.
Thank you for that. All right, so thank you for having us. Caltrans is really glad to discuss advancing open standards in the public sector. My name is Lynn Hiel, and I'm a bridge engineer in the Office of Bridge Design South, and I'm co-chair of the BIM for Bridges and Structures Committee. We got started in early 2020 with this committee. The committee consists of Meena Pazeshpour and Elias Karani, who are co-technical managers of the committee. Bin Shen is also a co-chair of this committee, and Peyman Kaviani and Surush Mavandari are specialists in this committee. Last summer, Caltrans established a BIM specialty branch in bridge design that will support BIM pilot projects for the organization. Bin Shen is the branch chief of this specialty group, and I'm privileged today to present the work also of my colleagues, Peyman, Surush, and Austin Wang, who are shown here from the branch. During the first 3 weeks of January 2023, a sequence of 9 atmospheric rivers hammered California, bringing intense, sustained, and severe rainfall across the state. 11 inches of rain fell, and 34 million people were under flood watch. There were over 700 landslides, 53 road closures, and evacuations in 7 counties. Also, dramatic scenes unfolded, like this 15-foot sinkhole in Chatsworth, California, that swallowed 2 cars. The Sierra Nevada mountains experienced 400 to 600% above average snowfall. Power outages affected more than 500,000 people. 20 deaths resulted from the extreme storms, and damages are now estimated at over $1 billion. Caltrans was on the front lines, keeping the public safe during the storms, and dedicated teams are now designing emergency road repairs and replacement structures to reconnect Californians. As the chart shows, in recent years, precipitation variability has been consistently over 1 in California, meaning highly variable precipitation and more potential for devastating storms. Civil engineers are society's professional problem solvers, but like this chart shows, the scope of the problems are large and they're growing. New tools and digital delivery methods will help us. They'll help us to navigate the many dimensions of complexity that we face and make thoughtful design decisions. At the same time, digital delivery will enable us to respond rapidly to disasters and reestablish resilient infrastructure in an emergency. Our ability to meet this moment will depend on having good data, supporting and informing multidisciplinary teams that make these important decisions together. It will depend on building a highway not made of asphalt and concrete, but rather an information superhighway made of connected data and governed by open standards. Caltrans is building an information superhighway that will connect designers, planners, environmental specialists, engineers, contractors, regulatory agencies, and local communities, among so many other stakeholders. On this information superhighway, there are no roadblocks due to proprietary software formats. There are no members-only VIP lanes. There are no forced merges to one single lane. There are no toll booths, and there are no speed bumps to slow us down. On this information superhighway, open standards give everyone equal opportunity to travel unencumbered and to experience the limitless freedom of the open road. Today, I would like to fly through the landscape of BIM in California and at Caltrans. Then I'll highlight some features of our information superhighway by discussing some of our current Caltrans pilot projects. Next, I'll touch on how we're planning to extend our information superhighway to include the wider bridge industry. And finally, I know there are some engineering students on this call today, and I'm so glad you came. I'm saving the last section of my presentation for you. BIM developments at Caltrans track closely with developments on the state, national, and international levels. At the highest level, we have the ISO 19650. This information management standard is nicely aligned with the existing ISO 9001. This standard is used at Caltrans already as the quality management standard. At the national level, we have the Federal Highways Administration, BIM for Infrastructure Roadmap that sets out the federal goals for BIM over the next decade. AASHTO is the American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials, and they're a body that represents transportation departments in the 50 states, DC, and Puerto Rico, and they set the technical standards for all phases of the highway system development. In January of 2023, AASHTO published an information delivery manual for bridges and structures. This was the outcome of a pooled fund project that Caltrans was part of, and I'll get to a little more of that later. Then on the right, we have the California legislation that will help to advance BIM at Caltrans. AB 1037 requires Caltrans to develop an implementation plan for the use and integration of digital construction management technologies. And finally, we have the Buy Clean California Act. This sets the maximum acceptable global warming potential limits for eligible materials, and Caltrans needs to track the environmental impacts of these materials. Zooming in now to Caltrans specifically, there are a number of ongoing efforts. There's been a lot of cross-functional collaboration in the lead up to developing a BIM for infrastructure implementation plan. Caltrans also views its models and their associated data as digital assets, and it's looking at how to collect, collaboratively build up, and share that information-rich model over the project lifecycle and with many stakeholders. This focus is part of the CALMS initiative. The North Region and the Bay Area districts of Caltrans are pioneering the implementation of BIM. Bridge Design is working on some of these pilots, and I'll present that in later slides. Finally, 18 engineers and managers from across Caltrans are deepening their knowledge of BIM and open standards by pursuing the professional qualification openBIM Foundation course. Caltrans Bridge Design has been part of the AASHTO Pooled Fund Research Project since the beginning, and we see open standards as essential for the public procurement process and supporting our interactions with construction contractors and fabricators. At the end of this project, software vendors will undergo a certification process to prove that they can produce high quality and neutral IFC data for bridges and structures. BIM is more than a 3D model to Caltrans. It's about consistent data, and that requires adequate planning. With grant funding from the California State Transportation Innovation Council, Caltrans developed BIM execution plan templates for some of the most common bridge types and retaining walls. We've worked with our colleagues in roadway design to develop template attachments for roadway elements. In the pilot projects, we're seeing the BIM execution plans do their job by aligning project teams around a set of information requirements, agreements, and expectations to make sure that everyone on this BIM journey is with us on the same road trip to the same destination. The results of good BIM execution planning are models that benefit not only design, but other stakeholders downstream. And in our early pilot projects, we're already seeing these exchanges starting to take shape. In this particular bridge widening project, the model is being used during planning as an additional check to verify the precise location of steel bearing plates that will be welded to the steel girders before delivery and erection on site. Bridge Design uploads their bridge model into the common data environment and attaches 2D detail sheets that are generated from the model. These detail sheets have the extracted dimensions and key elevations of the base plates. The model elements are being classified according to the national bridge elements and bridge management elements that are required for bridge maintenance and inspection. As mentioned, the Common Data Environment platform is being used to support this close, focused collaboration with structure construction. The steel bridge model was also exchanged with construction via the IFC format. Construction has demonstrated that they can load this IFC model into their field equipment and use that model for inspection. Bridges with pier walls like this existing structure are barriers to fish passage, and the Fish Passage Improvement Program has worked to reopen streams and rivers to migratory fish. Caltrans has so many coastal bridges that they've developed standard designs for these replacement structures. We're using this pilot project as an opportunity to model these standard designs and save our components as library objects. Finally, retaining walls make up a large part of the Caltrans bridge design work, and they're also a large part of the emergency projects that are now ongoing related to the recent California storms. We anticipate that the use of BIM on retaining wall projects will be beneficial. All parties have insight into the design. We can coordinate our work with utilities, right-of-way, and others. The model is also easy to adapt if alignments are updated. We're also working with our colleagues in geotechnical services to model the soil layers in 3D cylinders, so you'll actually see the boring records represented visually. This provides all parties with great insight about what's happening under the surface. Well, it's not good enough if Caltrans has a fancy BIM model and we keep it all to ourselves. On this BIM journey, we're all in it together. To get a sense of the landscape for BIM among California bridge contractors, we sent out a survey and received 15 responses. 87% of contractors indicate that they anticipate benefits from BIM, and they have the desire to use new tools and processes. But a majority of contractors also say that there are no clear model objectives, no clear standards, and a lack of interoperability. As a consequence of this, contractors have no basis to develop formal organizational BIM strategies or invest in BIM training. With a lack of trained staff and no experience, the benefits remain a pipe dream rather than a reality. Caltrans has the ability to break this vicious cycle at its root by setting requirements for model deliverables and promoting open standards to support interoperability. We're also reaching out to fabricators via industry associations like the Concrete Reinforcing Steel Institute. Last summer, we had a meeting with the BIM task group of CRSI West, and there was a lot of enthusiasm for the mutual benefits that Caltrans and the fabricators will gain from a model-based exchange. We've created some rebar models for key bridge components such as hinges and bent caps, where reinforcement is particularly complex. We've exchanged again these models via IFC with our partners in construction. They've again demonstrated that construction can load the models into their field equipment and can use this data for inspection. And that brings me to my final section. For you, the engineers of tomorrow. To the engineers of tomorrow, if you have the opportunity, take a risk, challenge your assumptions, and travel. Live in another corner of the globe for a while and see what life is like. I was lucky to spend the first part of my career journey living in Stuttgart, Germany, and working on projects in many different places. I worked on the Danish Architectural Center in Copenhagen, Denmark, where I saw the virtual 4D simulations that I'd put together come to life in the real construction on site. It was also a great experience to lead the BIM delivery for 4 tender packages in London for the High Speed 2 railway, and I learned so much by working under the stringent and comprehensive UK BIM requirements. More importantly, I had supervisors and mentors who challenged me and who believed in me. They lended me a view through their unique lens of experience and perspective, resulting in a widened aperture for us both. During that time, I also realized that BIM's ability to support collaboration often depended on the agreements in the construction contract. A mentor encouraged me to consider studying construction law and dispute resolution. It seemed unusual for an engineer to pursue this, but I can say with a bit of perspective now that it was one of the best decisions that I made. It gave me much insight into project delivery, and the communication skills I had to develop over this course have served me well. To the engineers of tomorrow, always remember that diverse, inclusive, and multidisciplinary teams are a strength. There is overwhelming evidence that these teams ask better questions and come up with more creative and innovative solutions. But there are also specific reasons why this matters for the building industry. We design and build the physical infrastructure that sculpts our cities and transportation networks. This will be crucial to tackling the global challenges of our generation, such as climate change. Surely it's self-evident that we want and that we need a profession that looks more like the society that it serves. Engineering is a creative and it's a human-centric career. Engineering is for everyone. To conclude, I'd like to take a step back now in history. Many of the bridges and structures in the Caltrans inventory date back to this time, the 1950s. President Dwight Eisenhower signed the Federal Highway Act that would breathe life into the interstate highway system. It would be called the greatest public works project in history. At the time, a computer was called a UNIVAC. It was a machine the size of a one-car garage and weighed 8 tons. It had about 700 transistors. In the mid-1960s, Gordon Moore, who was one of the co-founders of Intel, began to plot computer speed per unit cost over time. The 1951 UNIVAC with its 700 transistors landed here. His graph led him to note that computers were doubling in their capacity and their speed per unit cost every 18 months, resulting in this exponential relationship shown here. For comparison, the Apple A12X chip used in the iPad has 10 billion transistors on it. And if Moore's curve holds true, a speed per unit cost of 10 to the power 13. So this brief history illustrates the question and the opportunity for Caltrans and the wider industry. How will we harness this computing power to support civil engineering and project delivery in the 21st century? How will we leverage this computing power for efficiency to give taxpayers and stakeholders the greatest return on their investment? As I've shown in this presentation, for us, open standards are central to that answer. Thank you for your attention.
Right. I guess that is my cue. So are you guys seeing my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. So thank you for the opportunity to have me speak today, joining these two amazing women that I've had the privilege to know over the last couple of years. And they're a tough act to follow, but I'm really excited to be part of the conversation. And so today I'm going to tell you a little bit about my personal journey and how digital delivery has shaped my journey as a professional. I'll talk a little bit about my experience in the public sector, some of the things that we've done as an industry together, and my unique experience going from the public sector to the private sector, and how we can work together to set that future for our industry. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So the public sector has done quite a bit of work in the last couple of decades to move digital delivery forward. I personally got involved with digital delivery early in my career when I went to work for the Missouri Department of Transportation right out of college. I was one of the very first engineers looking at designing and a new software at the time that was called GeoPack. And so I helped the department to migrate to that from the old software and a lot of the drafting tables and things like that we had at the time. So I spent over 16 years of my career with MoDOT, and I have a pretty interesting background, I guess you would say. I am a professional civil engineer, registered in Arizona and Missouri. I spent much of my early years in road design. I had the opportunity to go to construction inspection. Back to what Lynn was saying, you know, asking for those opportunities to do different things in your career are absolutely life-changing, or at least it was for me, because I got to see a different part of what I was doing. And I learned a lot. It made me a better roadway designer when I came back to design after that experience. But I had the opportunity to do something totally different. And I took a leap of faith when I went to a position in the central office to look at automation and technical support and training to bring everybody to these digital tools that would help them be more efficient and create better products for the department. As part of my career at MoDOT, I was involved in very many different areas, industry involvement, and the department was wonderful at encouraging that professional development, which I believe is on you as well to invest in yourself. So after 16 years of the department, I had the opportunity to implement electronic signatures, electronic plans, common data environments, and model-centric design, as well as piloting earthwork models for construction is for information only. And I had a unique opportunity to do something different with my life at that time. And so I decided to change the way I was doing things and join the private sector, doing totally different things. So when I moved to the private sector 7 years ago, I started doing a lot of national research. I started developing technical guidance for my peer DOTs that became my clients, and started doing a lot of digital delivery consulting, similar to what Cindy spoke of earlier today. And I continue to be involved in industry, volunteering my time in different committees, buildingSMART International, buildingSMART USA, and continue to invest in my own professional development. So, as I mentioned, the public sector has been instrumental in driving digital delivery for infrastructure. And, we talk about 3D technology and BIM today, but really it goes back. It has a little bit of history. And I always like to talk about where we've come from so that we can understand where we're going to. And back in the 90s, of course, we've had that 3D technology available to us in infrastructure, mainly for roadway or for earthwork movements. But in the 2000s, because of all the equipment that contractors were getting with GPS on board to guide earthwork movement type machinery, there was a lobbying effort to go to the DOTs and ask for these digital deliverables at the time.
Sorry,
so it was, I'm sorry.
I think we lost your screen.
Oh, okay.
That again.
Sorry about that.
No,
I'm not sure how that happened. Thank you.
there you go.
And you're seeing my full screen?
Not yet.
Oh. There. I think that's it. You're seeing it now?
Yep, we got it.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. So in 2005 is about the time where a lot of state DOTs started issuing these 3D earthwork models for information only as a response, as a reaction to the request from the contracting community. And many DOTs joined in that effort, MoDOT being one of them, and so many more. In the 2010s, the Federal Highway Administration, through their Everyday Counts program, which is a technology deployment and support program for the state DOTs, started promoting various digital delivery innovations. We start seeing in 2015, many of the state DOTs started issuing earthwork models as the legal document as it's become known, meaning that it superseded any sign and seal paper or PDF plans, if you will. In 2017, the Transportation Pool Fund, BIM for Bridges and Structures, was created, the phase one of that pool fund that Lynn spoke of earlier. Another important event that happened recently in 2019 was the adoption of IFC by ASHTO, or the Association of American State Highway Officials, Transportation Officials. And that was transcending because it is a technical standard organization, and it kind of set the tone for what was to come. As part of that resolution, AASHTO also created a multi-disciplinary committee called JSTAN, or the Committee on Standardization. And also in 2019, there was the creation of a new transportation pool fund specific for BIM for infrastructure, in addition to what was doing for bridges. So really we can say, and I think you all can agree, that we're going through this industry digital transformation. We've been doing electronic workflows for a long time, as long as I can remember, which are based on paperless document type exchanges. I call these electronic papers myself. There's a lot of manual entry and things that we just need to get away from. And what we're trying to do is really transform those workflows into truly digital workflows, which are database exchanges that facilitate that transfer of information to a computer system with very little to no manual entry or human interpretation of the plans. So, so as we're going through all of this, what's happening is that you're seeing that our needs are driving standardization. We can no longer have just standards that are applicable for this agency or that agency or this particular purpose. We really have to come together to drive standardization to resolve all the problems that we are facing today. We have tremendous technology. We have digital data being transferred and being created. And we really need that repeatable, reproducible process so that we can do our quality compliance, so that we can be innovative, so that we can rely on the information, the outputs and the inputs of the information that we are creating. But more importantly, I think driving standardization is going to really help us develop our workforce and maintain equity within our industry so that information is accessible to everybody. Talk a little bit about advancing open data standards. I think it's a great example of many organizations coming together for a common goal. And I have to say, our bridge friends, Lynn is a part of this particular pool fund in terms of a sponsor. We have 24 states that came together to agree on a common goal to create open data standards to facilitate the data transmission of bridge information. It had never been done before, and it's setting the tone for everything else to come. And so why is this important to us? Personally, it's more than important. It really is showing how we are no longer just moving information forward for our own individual organizations, but really coming together as an industry to make it better for everybody else. And so this information delivery manual that Lynn talked about, that was just adopted or was published in January of this year, is the first US standard for bridges 3D model data. Why this is significant is because it advances the adoption of BIM, because it's given us that ability to enable data fidelity, right? Is going to help us enhance interoperability, which we know is a problem today. But more importantly, it's setting a clear direction for the software developers and the entire supply chain that this is the way we want to do business from now on. And it's not an individual effort. It builds upon the international efforts that have taken place for many years, and it creates long-term sustainability. And what allows us to do now is that now that we've done one of these IDMs, we can do more. We can set that framework for other exchanges that are important that need to be defined yet. And there are many that need to happen. Lynn mentioned the FHWA National Strategic Roadmap. So I'll just recap a little bit that it is a 10-year plan, and it has many activities related to BIM policies and processes, building competencies, and providing strategies for best practices in a BIM world, as well as how organizations can manage that change as we transition from what we know to what really we need to be doing. And also an area on standards for data management tools and techniques. And like I said, it is a 10-year plan. So that is available online. Now transitioning to what I've done in the digital delivery in the private sector, let me tell you a little bit about how we in transportation, as transportation consulting firms, are using 3D model. These are some examples of the projects that my colleagues here at HDR are doing. I can tell you that many engineers use these tools today as part of the process. Obviously, visualization is one of the things that we've always highlight as a benefit of BIM, but it's more than just visualization. We talk about multidisciplinary coordination. Cindy talked about that being a really important way to get these projects delivered more effectively, more efficiently, and we are using those today in transportation projects. We also have to recognize that we may not be ready, not everybody may be ready to completely abandon plan sheets, but today what we can do, we are in this hybrid environment where we can leverage that digital information, that BIM-centric information, to output products that other people can rely on. The difference is that we are providing an output of our models, right? It's no longer just drawing down lines on a piece of paper or even a CAD drawing that ends up being a static paper, if you will, electronic paper, but really is about allowing the tools to help us do better things for the process. Construction staging, we're starting to see a lot of engineers and specifically in bridge modeling to model those staging phases of construction, which typically we do not do in transportation. We are starting to leverage these BIM processes to estimate quantity, something that in the building industry has been around for a long time, but not in transportation specific to highways and roads. We are also starting to leverage model-centric design reviews to the point where in these early deliverables, we are not producing plans. That is kind of an ineffective way to conduct business. So we know that at 30%, there's not a whole lot that is being produced, and we spend more time developing sheets and notes than we do on evaluating the information. So we are working with many clients on piloting these efforts that maybe at 30%, we just have model-based deliverables so that we can move the project much quicker and so on and so forth. So we are starting to see those things. And finally, as we move forward with together, we really need to work together. I always say that it takes a village, right? I think Lynn said earlier, it takes all of us to be able to advance this in the public sector. Our responsibility is to set the vision, to fund these initiatives, and to enable innovation. Lynn talked about contractual requirements. Sometimes we are very prescriptive in our requirements, which inhibits innovation. We really need to be thinking performance-based type contract so that we can collaborate with industry better. On the private sector, we need to collaborate with our technology providers to embrace model-based delivery as a way of doing business, not because someone told me I had to do it. That is something that it is on us as a private sector to do. We need to invest in our technology and drive innovation to work together with the public sector. And as we move forward, the key to bridging that gap is creating this structured data through openBIM. We need to be creating these standards for organizing and collecting and creating data. I know these standards exist for building industry. They do not for highways and roads. So we really need to start thinking about storing and integrating all this information and analyze the data to transform into information. So we need to be, as an industry, in encouraging our technology providers to leverage those openBIM standards. So as we bring two worlds together, I want to mention a little bit about project development and delivery and operation maintenance. Cindy talked a little bit about it, and we often have different functions, right? The function of project development is to create instructions to build design intent and to track our measurements for pavement in our contracts. On the other hand, operation and maintenance function is to manage functional and operational life of that physical asset. And the two don't always coincide when we talk about language, when we talk about how we structure information. And so I think personally that this is one of the things that has to absolutely change for us to enable openBIM standards in transportation. We look at project development, and what we do today is contract-based data structure. It's not like we're not structuring data, we're just structuring it differently to based on task, work methods, and materials, when in reality, we need to be mirroring operations and maintenance way of data structure, which is object-based. You know, if we really want to have that digital twin, we really need to resemble the physical asset and current conditions and operational performance. And that's how we need to be organizing our information. And so what I'm saying here is that we don't need to change the terminology, we just need to connect them. We need to figure out how to connect these two worlds together. And this is an example of how something like that could be used. We really need structured information. We need to have a consensus on how we're going to organize data. This is just one example. Doesn't mean that this is the way it has to be, but this is one example of how it could happen. And so what I have here is just an example of a traffic barrier system where we look at modeling with 3D object, 3D attribution to that object. It's not just a 3D model, but there's a lot of information that comes through. And it's information that is used in operations, right? And so if we really need to compare these two things, this is how it is in design and construction in a model-based environment. Take a look at what it is in reality, because I have a friend that is in operations and maintenance, and she's always said that design and construction is about 5 minutes of the life of that asset. So we really need to be focusing on that physical asset that gets built at the end. Wait, I'll just talk. I know I'm running out of time. So interoperability. This is where I see our industry going forward. I see a time where an engineer is going to be able to choose their software of choice. We're going to be able to export these files for the owner. The owner is going to be able to advertise these projects using IFC files, and the contractor is going to be able to use those files for their means and methods for preparing bids and so on. I see in the future that we have to create new processes and workflows. We will be working on model-centric design environment, but we're also going to be collaborating in a model-centric environment through these common data environments. We're going to be moving towards model is legal document, meaning we really want to get away from plan sheets. And I think that is one big difference between infrastructure and perhaps the building world, is that we really don't want to mess with plans anymore. And we're going to be focusing on these digital as-built, these handoffs that go to O&M from construction. And I wouldn't be doing good service here if I didn't talk about talent. We need to be upskilling our talent. We need to find ways to transfer the knowledge today. We need to think about how we're going to retool skill sets, because you can see skill sets that we have today are not going to work for the future. So when we have inspectors doing forms to document the progress of construction, they may need to learn how to fly a drone or how to operate a GPS piece of equipment, and so on. And the other thing that I see is we're going to focus on specialties. We're going to need people that are specifically good at creating 3D models. We're going to need people that are good at 4D modeling and 5D modeling or information management. So I think we need to start thinking about upskilling our talent. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Karen.
Hey everyone, welcome to the audience who's been with us through these wonderful presentations that we had. So thank you, you three. We are recording this so they can go back and look at some of the finer and more detailed and nuanced parts of your presentations. I'm Karen Kensek. I teach at USC School of Architecture. I'm part of that group of people helping to prepare young people to go on to building information modeling. And we have our own interoperability exercises we force our students to go through. So my first question is sort of a really general question for all three of you, and any of you can pick up on it, is how is buildingSMART engaging with the owners? I mean, those are the people with the money. In some cases, the owners are people, some it's the public, like myself, who pays taxes. So how are they engaging with the owners in the public sector to remove obstacles so that the software vendors are compelled to support interoperability?
You know, I'll jump in quickly, just being on the executive board with buildingSMART here in the United States. You know, I think they're a resource, to put it very simple. You know, they can explain to a government owner what is the capabilities of the IFC files today in the schema today, and then where it ultimately plans to go. And would they like to maybe sponsor a product, you know, a project to get there, which I think is really important. So, and that doesn't only exist for owners. You know, I have smaller private clients where I will call and say, you know, here's a problem we have. I can't understand what's happening with the ICFL. Who does this? You know, can you help give me somebody else so that I can learn from them, whether it's here in the United States or overseas? And I think they're very, very good at that, of kind of putting the two parties together to make sure that we're all moving in the same direction.
Yep, very good. Any of the other two like to chime in on that?
Yeah, I could definitely chime in. I agree with Cindy, and Lynn, jump in here anytime. But I think part of the work that AASHTO is doing, or the pool fund specifically is doing, is creating that relationship between the owners and BSI. So I know that as a group, as the Transportation Pool Fund, we are very involved with BSI activities.
Yeah, and AASHTO came out with a resolution that IFC would be the format for the exchange of engineering electronic data. So this is highly relevant for, you know, any transportation department. And I think, you know, the pooled fund for us has been our interaction with, you know, buildingSMART and with this IFC, in a sense, movement, because you have 24 DOTs, you know, together making a statement and saying, this is the way we would like to operate.
You know, and I see a question here really quickly about how do you bridge that gap, you know, also and build consensus. Broward County actually did exactly that. They wrote the standard. They looked at the guidelines and the standards that buildingSMART had in place at the time. And then we consensus based it as an open meeting, not only to all of the practitioners that currently had contracts at Broward County, but the industry at large. And we had hundreds of people that came out to kind of say to us, hey, that works, or that's great for a couple years down the road, but actually that's not how we're working with the IFC files today. So I think consensus-based organizations, you know, AGC, AIA, you know, as the airport chair, we're working with AAAE and trying to understand what they're doing with the TRB and the different studies that are happening on digital twins and how that's applicable here to the airport. So I look at buildingSMART as an umbrella organization that's kind of working with all of those groups, not only organizationally, but then practitioner wise. For them to have me on a board as a small practitioner, I think shows a change in buildingSMART, that it's not just for academics or big firms or big government agencies. It is for the small person like me as well.
So that leads to another question that came up during your talk, Alexa. If the private developer requests data from the municipality, will the latter provide the IFC-based BIM models to start with? I mean, we're talking about interoperability, but on the other hand, I come from the architecture design side of things. We find people still very protective of their models. And now that we're preaching open standards, are we preaching more collaboration and giving these models to other people you're working with?
Yes, absolutely. I think so. I think that's a primary difference between what we're seeing in infrastructure than any other sectors, is that as an industry, we're coming together and saying, this is something we need to do. Now, it's about risk management, right? And the reason why people don't want to give their models away is risk management. And so as long as contractors, designers, and owners are working together to define the rules of how we're going to manage risk through a variety of standards, whether it's, you know, that there is the data exchanges, but also how we're going to review those models, you know, how we're going to manage changes during construction. How are we going to make sure that everybody can access those files and have the right technology? I think it's something that we're definitely considered, but I'm going to ask Lynn to provide her opinion as an owner, because and we're working together, not to put you on the spot, Lynn, but I think we're all have that mentality that it takes all of us to make that happen.
Yeah, thanks. And I would also add, like, we have the ISO standards, as an overall global framework for us. And those ISO standards, I went to a presentation a few weeks ago, and they're, the framework of that was being used to manage 418 models, in the common data environment. So everybody has an interest in keeping their information, private until it's checked and verified, and then submitting that to be shared with the rest of the team as is normal. But that ISO provides that 4-stage framework: work in progress, shared, published, archived, in order to make people comfortable with, my information is verified, validated, checked, and ready to go. So we need that kind of, control and transparency and control to make this sharing and collaboration really work, I think.
Let me pick up on that, Lynn. And we all understand the very high importance of the IFC for the open standards. But I did get a question, and I'm going to give it to you as it was typed in, is Caltrans going to pick a standard software, and will cities and counties follow suit? And they're a little bit worried because clients have different standards, and maybe Caltrans should pick one and tell people. And it comes back to this training problem we're seeing, because they, like other people, cannot afford to train in many different software programs.
Right. I can speak from the bridge design perspective, but we're committed to this open standards idea. So we have a lot of software we're using, but everybody will ultimately, if you're a consultant or a contractor, will interact with us via the common data environment someday. So regardless of what you're using, we will be able to integrate there. As far as standards for information, I described, we're using the ISO 19650 as our overall framework for BIM, and of course we're going to develop more Caltrans specific and California specific standards under that. Yeah, I think my managers Mina and Elias and Ben are on the line. If they have any additional thoughts on that, I'd like to introduce their thoughts as well.
Sure, thank you, Lynn. I can chime in. In Caltrans, as Lynn mentioned, we use a lot of different software. In the bridge design for analytical part, we have the rules that we need to have the design and check independent software. But as Lynn mentioned, we are very open to the open standard, and whatever our consultant firm use it, we can accommodate that.
But the question did come up earlier in the chat that people, at least one person, was worried about how can they check if their design is compliant with the BIM open standards? Or is there a way to check to see which part of their CAD drawing or BIM model is IFC compliant? So people might be willing to do this, but they don't necessarily know how to do this.
Yeah, I think there will be a solid definition of the at least for bridges and structures of the IFC definition for that, and all the attributes that need to be included, and that will lend itself well to checking tools to make sure that. And I imagine that in the future that will be a layer before you can submit your model to the common data environment. It will go through a gate of quality checking, and that type of those types of checks will be evaluated.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of the BSI ecosystem of standards is going to help with that. Things like the IDS and the new IFC 4.3 schema and model view definitions are going to be part of those tools that will allow us to be able to export what we're supposed to be exporting, but also checking and validating that we are indeed providing the information that we were requested to provide.
And we do have some of our clients that have custom model checkers that they're working on. Kansas City International Airport has one that checks data. So things that are really, really important to them that the market might not be mature enough with software tools, they customize their own. But there's the interoperability toolkit. Autodesk has a bunch of them. buildingSMART has a list of software that is IFC compliant that can do those exports. And then as an owner, you check, you put aside what you want to check that is a priority for you, and then it helps you be able to map those workflows. I would say start small. First of all, ask for native file format. And also ask for an IFC and just make sure that it's exported and that the files, the drawing sheets match, the IFC drawing sheets match the native file format. If you do that, it's nothing more than a simple check. You're already one step further down the road.
Yeah, it also seems that there are a lot of resources now available. I mean, when IFC first came out, it was like, what are you guys talking about? Don't know what this is. Why should I be doing this? I've been doing it this way for 20 years. But I think there are a lot of resources. I think that buildingSMART has a lot of resources that people can go after and take a look at these things that make a lot of sense. So we have this open standard part. We also have that part of the title of this talk was digital delivery. And I mean, I think most of us think we're doing digital delivery. We have little PDF files and we give them to people, and we have these CAD files and we have these IFC files. But I think you're trying to say that is really what Alexa called electronic workflow. It really isn't a digital workflow. How can we move towards a truly digital workflow using these open standards? It's hard, I know.
Yeah, it is hard. And I think we need to create the framework to be able to do those things. And I think that's what you're hearing here today, the work that Cindy is doing, the work that Lynn and the entire pool fund for BIM for Bridges and Structures is trying to do, and many others. I mean, these are just some examples of the different ways that people are trying to create that framework and those solutions to enable that. But it's a long road, right? I mean, we are just starting to, right?
It is a long road. I mean, I think there's a lot of international efforts that are out there. We don't necessarily have so many US examples. We're working on that to try to get some US examples so that people can relate to it here on this side of the pond. But what I would say is I think there's some proprietary software out there that is doing that. They are creating common data environments and they are being very software centric. So it's not that this digital thread, this golden thread, isn't trying to be established by commercial and proprietary software systems. All we're saying is that you need to have those systems have an interoperability. I don't know how to upload my phone. I don't know how to create apps, but I can sure as heck put them two right next to each other. And the next thing I know, all the data is moved over. We're trying to make it that way so that in an open standard on that back end, it allows the software providers to say, look, we're not competing. Adobe is the example with PDF, right? Yeah. Hey, you know what? Let's have Bluebeam out there and Adobe and everybody else, but Adobe made that an open standard. So buildingSMART is writing that open standard that all software companies then can relate to enable that as a digital thread, as well as having software solutions. So right now it's a mixed bag. And that's where I think it's important for your consultants to make sure that we are managing and communicating and not overselling what it could be. IFC, everybody's like, oh, it's horrible, we're not doing it. Well, that was years ago. Let's listen to where it broke, right? Now let's make the steps to make it better and to find those use cases to show where IFC is working. And then all I ask people to do is, hey, support it. If you have something that you want, just like Lynn did with her organization in California with roads and bridges, and Alexa with HDR, they have an initiative that they're supporting in that regard. I think the industry at wide should look to help support that movement.
Well, I think also I'm really glad that buildingSMART has leapt to this as their vision, and I keep seeing more resources available from them. Also, I think that we always talk about the bigger projects. Now today we're talking about different scales of projects, which I think is super important. For example, I was really intrigued, I do have to say, about the Fish Passage Bridge. And that is your pilot study. I mean, that is not an airport. It is not the entire highway system of California. That is a fish passage bridge for happy fish to go back to their spawning grounds. I mean, how are those pilot studies coming along? And I'm going to put you on the spot here. Is that something that could end up on the buildingSMART website as a little case study? how things went well or how things didn't go well.
Right. Well, we'll get back to you about if it can be posted. But yeah, I think you know, we have to choose things that are manageable. You know, choose examples where we can really get the most out of BIM. You can't start with it, you know, a huge project or something like that. We have to pick manageable things. So this project is like I said, the fish passage bridges are you know, they're very standardized, and so that even though it's small, because that's always a question around BIM, you know, does it really, you know, is there a return on small projects? Does that have, you know, any impact? And I think what this will show is, you know, we can repeat this many times, and this will have some benefit. So so we'll see how it goes. Yeah, we'll keep you posted. We're in the early days now. But thanks for your interest, and I also wanted to thank the audience for the fantastic chat. I've been reading it as well. I would like a copy too. So a really active group. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we'll definitely share everything. We'll share the questions, and we'll try to get as many answers as we can and share them together with the recording. Thank you so much, Alexa, Cindy, Lynn, Karen, for this great panel discussion. I really didn't want it to end, but we are 15 minutes after. So let's continue another time. Thank you to the audience for asking great questions, for joining us today, and look out for the recording.